Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, May 24th, 2024. The FAIRtax and the national debt. Many people understand that the FAIRtax, a national retail sales tax on new retail goods and services, replaces the income payroll tax system as the way the federal government obtains the funds it needs to operate. Now, there's nearly universal agreement among the nation's economists that replacing the federal income payroll tax system with the FAIRtax would result in a thriving economy with unprecedented economic growth. The logic is very clear. As the economy grows and more capital is available, the rapid increase in productivity will create more income for people. As a result, consumption of new retail goods and services will increase, leading to much higher U.S. Treasury collections. The increased funds could be applied to start reducing the $34 trillion plus U.S. national debt. Unfortunately, the D.C. elites have shown a stunning lack of concern for the nation's burgeoning debt. Consequently, it's exceedingly likely that should federal revenues rise, the elites would just increase spending accordingly, continue to borrow more and more money, and keep digging a deeper and deeper hole. The D.C. elites and their minions are confident that ordinary people, that's those of us who aren't in D.C. and don't work for a university, that we're not smart enough to understand how the growing national debt directly harms each of us. There's an article entitled, "The More the Feds Borrow, the More We Pay for Mortgages, Credit Cards, and Student Loans." The author was E.J. Antony, a public finance economist at the Heritage Foundation. He sets out the real impact of the massive federal debt on each of us. Now, here's some of his observations. The Biden administration and Congress racked up $6.8 trillion of additional debt, which was paid by the Federal Reserve just creating the money. The result? The highest inflation rate in 40 years. When the Federal Reserve had to stop printing money to reduce inflation, the Treasury had to borrow from the public. Interest rates on Treasury bills, notes, and bonds increased, often more than 4 times the rate they were 4 years ago. Now, when there's a surge in demand for loanable funds, interest rates rise. When we apply at a bank for a mortgage or online for a credit card or at a dealership for an auto loan, we're competing with the U.S. Treasury to borrow money. Because the Treasury instruments are essentially guaranteed, our loans will have more risk of default and will therefore be priced higher. The result has been a tripling of mortgage interest rates for many borrowers, record high interest rates on credit cards, and the highest student and auto loan interest rates in more than a decade. Americans are paying more than $240 billion annually just in credit card interest before they put a dime towards paying down their balances. For the first time ever, interest on non-mortgage debt has caught up to the interest families are paying on their mortgages. Higher interest rates have increased the monthly payment on a medium-price home by over $1,000 compared to 3 years ago. That's an extra $12,000 each year for 30 years for the same house. In conclusion, the fiscal year 2022 budget was $6.01 trillion, but only $4.2 trillion was raised from the federal taxes. The remaining $1.8 trillion had to be borrowed. Now, if we're all sitting around our kitchen table and saw that we outspent our earnings by nearly 50%, we would instinctively know that if we didn't reduce our spending to match our earnings, we'd go bankrupt. Reducing household spending by that much would no doubt be painful. The family would likely have to forego vacations, purchase fewer and less expensive clothes, eat out less, drive less expensive cars. While downgrading one's lifestyle would certainly involve some sacrifice, the alternative would be losing it all. In the last days of the Roman Empire, the Roman emperors knew that the only way to remain in power was to distract the Roman citizens from what was happening to them by providing them circuses, gladiator fights, and food. It's possible that some of the elites do indeed realize that ignoring the debt will eventually lead to a widespread economic disaster if not confronted and handled soon. However, they have a problem. mandatory entitlement programs such as Social Security, Medicare, and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which account for about 65% of the federal budget. Balancing the 2022 U.S. budget would require a 33% reduction in spending. Because we need defense, roads, etc., much of the required spending cuts will have to come from the entitlement programs, and that presents a real problem for the elites. The elites know that as long as people continue to receive their benefits from the federal government, they will not be subject to scrutiny. As long as the money keeps flowing in, the people will tolerate the elites' gross ineptitude. However, if people receiving Social Security and other federal payments find out that their benefits are going to be cut by 33%, there will be such an uproar that the elites in Congress know they'll be exposed and thrown out of power, if not worse. Now, there's an elegant solution to this problem. Pass the FAIRtax. The economy and tax revenues will grow much more rapidly. Budget cuts are still required, but they'll not be as painful. Interest costs on the national debt will come down and again be less than we pay for defense spending. Rates for mortgages, car loans, and credit card loans will quickly go down. All Americans will be more prosperous and confident about their future, and Social Security and Medicare will be fully solvent. No senior will ever have to worry about having their retirement income reduced because of the inability to finance the national debt. The solution? Pass the FAIRtax. Now, just why would D.C. pass the FAIRtax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? Now, there's going to be a vote on the FAIRtax in the House of Representatives. We now have the opportunity to force all members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the President Income Payroll Tax System, or they can vote for the FAIRtax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can hide the true cost of their government, or they can pass the FAIRtax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. And finally, they can support the largest transfer of power from the government to the people, the FAIRtax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the FAIRtax needs to be amended to address a problem, then they can propose the change. Don't let them get away with rejecting the entire bill because it has a perceived flaw that can be easily addressed. And don't think for an instant there aren't any flaws in the income tax. Help bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org and invest in AFFT and help us pass the FAIRtax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.